I'm Sophie Seck. I'm the Senior Manager for Ethics and Compliance at Medicines Australia. And I'm joined also by my team member, Lucy O'Brien, who is also in the Ethics and Compliance team, and she'll pop on to help with questions and webinar logistics. So today we're talking about QR codes. We're talking about prescribing information and balanced promotional material. So I am going to assume a base knowledge of the Medicines Australia Code of Conduct. So it's a bit of a deep dive into those aspects of the code. I'm also going to be drawing from some guidance that we published last year and last month. So I'll be referencing those throughout the webinar to give you a place to go to after the info session. And we are talking today about generally product-specific material. So let's assume that the context will be that the material is directed only to healthcare professionals. As you know, in Australia, we don't promote prescription products to anyone who is not a healthcare professional. And because the definition of promote is fairly broad, it's safe to assume that we are talking about a vetted healthcare professional audience only in this session. I'd also like to acknowledge country. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the land of where I am meeting. And I recognise any other people or families with a connection to the lands of the ACT and the region. So as part of our reconciliation journey, and I know that me or any other members joining from Canberra, and acknowledge that you're all in different parts of our country, we'd like to give you the opportunity to acknowledge our First Nations people and the country on which you are meeting. And probably feel free to do so in the chat box. That would be great. A tiny bit on housekeeping. Today is a record number. We have 238 people registered to join today, which is an outstanding amount of interest in the code. And really thank you for that, that engagement. And because of the numbers, it's going to be really hard to find any questions if you pop them in the chat box. So we'd really encourage any questions that you would like directed towards me to use the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. But feel free to chat and use the chat box for your thoughts. We're also recording the session, so that will be available for listening to and looking at in the next few weeks. It won't drop on the Code Resource Toolkit tomorrow. Give us a couple of weeks and it will be there so that you can share with your colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. And I would also like to highlight the Code Help Desk. For any curly questions, any complex questions, and straightforward questions are always welcome as well. So Lucy and I are at the other end of that Code Help Desk email. If you need any clarity on what's talked about today or any curly dilemmas that you're facing in your work related to code, please reach out. So in this session today, we'll look at the importance of balance in promotional materials, and we'll unpack the options available to us in terms of providing accessible and legible prescribing information. So the idea of today's session is to better understand what it all means and where to go for information. It's not so much about this is good, this is bad, this is compliant, this is non-compliant. The information that we give is to try to be thought-provoking and to try and guide you in your own decision-making. It's also worth noting that I'm not talking about all aspects of promotional material today. So I'm not going to explore what makes up a promotional claim. I'm not going to talk about how one goes about substantiating a claim. Today's session is relatively high level. So this is what we're looking at. We'll dive into what the code actually says and what guidance is available to us. We'll take a deeper look at QR codes, how we're using them today, and the principles behind how to use them in your promotional material. We'll also have a closer look at balance and how one can achieve and think about balance in your product-related materials. And in those sessions, I'll hand it back to you for a little bit and give you some exercises and some just test your knowledge moments to get you thinking. We'll run through one last example. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the end, and also a midpoint as well, and finish on where to get further help. I do need to mention a caveat though. What we talk about today is guidance. It's guidance and only guidance. It doesn't replace what is actually written in the code. And it is the responsibility of every company to work within the principles of the code and make your own decisions about the appropriate level of information in your materials. So I'm not the decider about whether something is a breach of the code or not. We have an independent code of conduct committee that is authorised to make any binding decisions on code compliance, and they are independent of Medicines Australia. But the intent of today is to support you in your decision making, to allow you to be consistent with the code's principles. So, what does the code say? You will be aware that the code starts with overarching principles, which are all contained nicely and succinctly in the beginning of the code, one page. So 10 overarching principles, and they should apply to every activity that a company does. So the relevant overarching principles today are overarching principle 3 and overarching principle 7. They're on your screen. So as the primary repository of information relating to their products, i.e. the custodians of the prescription medicines that we produce, we are responsible for providing current, accurate, balanced and scientifically valid information on those products to support prescribers in their appropriate use. So the key word there is balanced and supporting the appropriate use of the product. And overarching principle 7, information relevant to prescribing, in particular product and safety information, are clearly communicated in all promotional materials to support the proper assessment of their risks and benefits. So some key highlighted words are risks and benefits, otherwise, well, benefits and risks, otherwise known as pros and cons, and to be clearly communicated in your material. Then the code steps out more detail in relevance sections. So today, the relevance section of the code is section 2, which is titled Requirements for Material Directed to Healthcare Professionals, HCPs abbreviated. So it starts off with a couple of dot points, which are expanded on this slide for you. And that is that material directed to healthcare professionals companies should be responsible for ensuring that only a healthcare professional audience can view and access that promotional material. Secondary, that promotional material must be clearly distinguishable as such. So a healthcare professional viewing promotional material should understand that they are viewing promotional material or experiencing a promotional event. So it shouldn't be disguised promotion or something that's packaged up to look like a non-promotional piece, but actually has the intent to promote that prescription medicine. It should be clearly legible. So presentation of the PI, the product information, or presentation of the MPI, the minimum product information, its qualifying statements, its references must be clearly legible. So not hiding in the corner in font size 6, for example, like it should be clearly and easily read. Also, the code requires that visible information is accurate and consistent with the code when read in isolation. So when I say within the material as a whole, they're my words, not the code's words. But that's one way of thinking about it. It's that the information that supports claims and supports the benefits and risks of a product need to be visible and when read in isolation. So not 3 steps removed from the material. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. Also that material containing promotional claims must provide sufficient prescribing information for healthcare professionals. So that's your kind of ABC of section 2. So promotional material is defined in the code to be any representation concerning the attributes of a product conveyed by whatever means for the purpose of encouraging the use of that product. So this is a definition taken from the Code of Conduct Glossary. So it's in the code, that definition. And as you can see, it's quite a broad definition. So when we talk about product information going to healthcare professionals, especially the risks and benefits, it's most likely that this will be understood or categorized as promotional material. When we talk about prescribing information, we mainly mean the mandatory prescribing information that the code requires to be included in product-related materials. So this is commonly and colloquially referred to as the mandatories. These mandatories are outlined in section 2.1 and 2.3 of the code. So 2.1 states the mandatory information that needs to go in product-related materials with claims. And section 2.3 articulates the mandatory information that needs to go in product-related materials that don't include any claims. So the purpose of this code inclusion is to ensure that companies communicate the very minimum product and safety information to support that product's use. However, it's worth noting that complying with section 2 of the code doesn't automatically ensure compliance with the overarching principles. So one must look at both the detailed sections of the code as well as the overarching principles. So including the mandatories as per the code provides a healthcare professional with the minimum prescribing information, but it should not be relied on to do everything. Specifically, the inclusion of mandatories will not necessarily provide the adequate balance to your material. And it is likely you will need more information in your material to allow a healthcare professional to assess the risks and benefits of that product. So where you are highlighting the benefits or claims, you will need to balance those benefits or claims with risks or risk and safety information. Therefore, material with larger or more promotional claims will require more information than material that doesn't include any claims. So let's have a quick roundup of what that mandatory information looks like. This is an example ad. Context is that this is a digital advertisement. So in terms of mandatories, we're looking at the brand name of the product. We're looking at the Australian approved name of the active ingredient, which needs to be placed adjacent to the most prominent presentation of the brand name. So once that is done, it doesn't mean that you need to keep on repeating that Australian approved name next to repeated mention of Xamplstat. As long as it's there in the most prominent position, you should be good. It should also include a statement indicating the PBS status of the product with or without details of the listing or a direction to where that relevant information is available. So if Xamplstat was also on the medical benefits scheme or the National Blood Authority or the National Immunisation Program or the Life-Saving Drugs Program, this is all in the code, then you would need to also include mention of its listing on those particular programs. As well, the code requires you to use a number of methods, like one of the following methods, to link that product to the product information. So in this case, this ad includes the inclusion of a URL or hyperlink to take the viewer to the product information. And in this case, this is electronically accessed materials. So there are other options available depending on the context of the ad. And I'll walk through these in a little bit. We need to use the name of the supplier or the sponsor of the pharmaceutical medicine and the city, town, and locality of the registered office, as well as the date that the material was prepared or last revised. So that's the general roundup of the mandatory information we need on any product-related material. So I did mention that the code gives us some examples or some options about how to direct the viewer to access the product information. So these are two other examples, exactly the same information. However, it gives you, it depends on the context of the ad. So in this one, it says, before prescribing, please review the approved product information from the trade display. So that would be an appropriate response if this was, let's say, on an AV rotating ad in a congress where people therefore were directed to go to the trade display to find the product information on that particular medicine. Another option is the inclusion of a URL or hyperlink for PI. And we're going to talk today about how a QR code is another way of providing that link, but this is also a viable alternative in this current modern day world that we live. So most of the content today on QR codes, I'd just like to direct you to some guidance we have on the Code Resource Toolkit. It is called the Using QR Codes or Hyperlinks. It was created in 2021, but we did revise it last year, including the option of digital minimum PI. So that's been revised, and that revision was published in July last year, and I'd really encourage you to go and have a read. So now that we're talking about QR codes, let's have a deeper dive into QR codes. But before we do, I thought I'd just give you a 20-second trivia question. So QR codes and the code. The code is silent on QR codes. It doesn't mention them. So what happens? Does the code, if the code is silent on an aspect, does that mean that we can do it or we can't do it? It doesn't mean that we can, and it doesn't mean that we can't. It means that we need to really look at the principle behind it and apply it to the context. And in this context is the use of QR codes. So we've done that for you. The code does allow for the PI to be accessed via URL or hyperlink in electronically accessed materials. So you've seen that mentioned, and that's a grab straight from the code. And another way of thinking about that is that, and we originally referred to it and colloquially as one click away. So within one click, the healthcare professional can access the product information. So using that similar principle, now that we live in a world where QR codes are commonplace, they can be used in print materials to link to the prescribing information. It is a similar concept. It's kind of one click away. And I'll talk about the one click in a bit later. But it's applying that similar mentality, that similar approach, and applying it in the modern context in which we work. It's probably worth noting that in the Code 19 review, which is currently underway, we are cognizant of the code terminology. And we need to, because we're embracing a principles-based code, we need to be mindful that the code doesn't mention some technology and not others. So we really need to get to a place where we can apply the same principles, the most important principles, to any context in which we work. So instead of having a whole lot of principles that apply to print, a whole lot of principles that apply to electronically accessed materials, and a whole lot of principles that apply to a sales presentation. We should really we're looking to get to a place where we have a whole lot of principles that can apply in a systems neutral way. And that in doing so, that will future-proof the code to emerging technologies that are no doubt going to arrive on our doorstep. So that's just a comment on the fact that we'll potentially, those words in the QR code, the words about technology will potentially change as we undertake this the review of Code Edition 19. So what can the QR code link to? So the QR code generally links to, in this context, product information. or the product information by the digital minimum product information, or the DMPI. Again, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. So that link can go to the PI, which could be hosted on the company website, or it can link to the TGA, the PI on the TGA website. The code doesn't say either way, as long as it takes the healthcare professional to the PI and that PI is current and is accurate. So think about the main principle being that it provides easy access to your audience and it is legible to your audience. So just reinforcing what I've said, this is section 2.1, required inclusions for materials, including promotional claims. These are the 4 options that the current Code Edition 19 steps out. When we say the inclusion of a URL or hyperlink for PI, for electronically accessed materials, we are interpreting that as being also allowing a QR code in print materials. So similar methodology using the same principle, and that's where that's been in place for a couple of years now. So considerations when using QR codes, this is well and above beyond the code, but now that we're in a space that we're using QR codes commonly in our promotional materials, it's quite good to take stock of good practice use. So make sure that your QR codes are high quality images, that they're not distorted or low res, that they make it difficult to use. Think about the placement of the QR code. So if the QR code is going to be placed on a pull-up banner at a trade display, if you've got that QR code at ankle length, then that's going to be quite difficult to scan for the attendees at that trade display. Think about the size of the QR code. So we don't mandate a size, but think about it as in the spirit of it being accessible, prominent, and legible. So the smaller the QR code, the harder it is going to be to use a mobile device to scan. Avoid multiple QR codes in one place. Again, this is it doesn't mean that you cannot use multiple QR codes in one place. But what I wanted to bring to your attention was if you pile a whole lot together in a close proximity to each other, it's going to be harder for the viewer to pick up that particular QR code or scan that particular QR code that they want that takes them to the PI. It also potentially makes it that PI piece less prominent if it's surrounded by other QR codes. So just think about the number of QR codes that you're planning on using and whether they need to be right close next to each other. Add a small call to action alongside the QR code. So the viewer should really understand before they scan where it's going to take them. And test the QR code, probably with a couple of different phones, just to make sure that it's working fine. So as we started using QR codes more and more, we commissioned some research with some general practitioners, with a couple of hundred general practitioners, which we did through one of our valued members, IQVIA. And we wanted to try and understand how healthcare professionals accessed the PI from our promotional materials. If they did it regularly, how did they do it, and what were their preferences for having this information at their fingertips? So we learned quite a few things, but the top takeaway was that when given the choice, 85% of those general practitioners indicated that they preferred clicking through to the digital minimum PI when compared to the current practice. So key issues coming out of that were that it gave healthcare professionals prominent access to the PI. It gave healthcare professionals easily navigatable information. It also gave them interactivity with a mobile device, and it allowed and ensured that that information was rapidly updated and not having to do a reprint. And that word cloud that you see on the screen picks out some of the themes that came from that research, and you can see obviously information, access, available, useful, full, easy interactions, succinct summaries are all some of those important aspects to think about from an HCP perspective. Who is your audience in this case? And some of those comments are useful also, that electronic access is a must via a scan code or other app, must contain succinct but relevant information to be able to be processed quickly and efficiently. And also would be good to make interactive, expanding fields and links, which leads me to introducing the digital MPI. So what is digital MPI? It is essentially a digital version of the MPI, the minimum product information. So section 2.2 of the code, and you can see that up on your screen in the top right-hand corner, lays out the minimum product information. And digital minimum product information is simply a digital version of that. So if you have a mobile phone available near you, can I encourage you to actually scan that QR code that you're seeing on the screen? And it will take you to a mocked up fictitious example of what digital minimum PI could look like. I hope you can have a play and you can see that it has all those approved indications, contraindications, etc. And it also has upfront the product information at the very top. So if a healthcare professional wants to go straight to the actual PI, they can do so. They don't have to wade through the information to find it. It has the accordions and it has black box warnings and triangles, etc. So as part of the mandatory requirements in sections 2.1 and 2.3, the code requires companies to provide information about their product. And one of these options, this is a digital minimum PI, provides you with one of these options on how to do that. You could choose to include the MPI in full inside your material, or you could link to the PI, or you could link to the digital minimum PI, which on links. It depends on the context of the material and what you're looking to do. So should we choose to use a digital minimum PI? What are the advantages and disadvantages, or what are the things that you should be thinking about, the pros and cons when we're talking about DMPI? So clearly, hopefully you've been able to experience it. It's a mobile-friendly formatting and mobile-friendly navigation. So it assists the healthcare professional. It gives you real-time, an ability to push out real-time updates, and therefore less reprints if there are changes to the PI or changes to the contraindications, etc. It gives you the ability to have greater real estate in your promotional material. And therefore it gives you, by having greater real estate, it gives you the ability to include more poignant information. And I suppose you can be comforted by the fact that healthcare professionals have indicated a preference to this format over current practices. In terms of the cons and what you should be wary of is that I suppose there is an increased risk of unbalanced material. It doesn't have to be that way, but by providing the minimum PI in a digital link and not spending the extra time to make sure that that material is balanced, or potentially filling up that extra real estate you had with more promotional claims or more promotional imagery, then I suppose a little bit more scrutiny needs to be made to ensure that your material is balanced. Also, you'll need to create and maintain those links and those QR codes. And thirdly, if a digital minimum PI needs to be hosted on some kind of microsite or digital portal, and that is something in your control that you create. So you need to manage that. But ultimately, it's a decision for each individual company to make as to whether a QR code links to the PI or it links to the digital minimum PI, and further if you're going to embed the actual minimum PI in a piece. The decision is yours. In any case, the company must ensure that the information accessed via the link is maintained and kept up to date, is always accessible, and that materials contain sufficient safety balance within them. I might just pause. I feel like I've been talking for half an hour and just ask Lucy if there are any questions that have come through relevant to what I've talked about.
Thanks, Sophie. We have had quite a few questions come through. So I've just chosen two of the most relevant ones. So the first one is, when clicking a digital link to the product information on the company's website, should this link go directly to open up the product information document and not the initial list of all the company product informations and CMIs?
Yeah, great question. So that actually feeds into this point. So let me talk to this point, and I think that it will answer the question. So the one click or two, if it went straight to the PI on the company's website, then that would be one click. If you took people to a dedicated page that had the PI and potentially some other information, then that would effectively be 2 clicks. And I suppose the main principle is that we don't want healthcare professionals to go on a hunt to find the PI. And what we would mean by that, or our expectations with that, would be that a viewer shouldn't need to scroll down a long page to find the PI relevant to that particular product, nor should they take them to a search engine where they actually have to input a term to find the PI that they're looking for. So it should be clear and legible. If that means 2 clicks, then there's no hard and fast rule. 2 clicks can be done quite quickly if the information is laid out and presented well. So to circle back to that question, Lucy, both options are possible. But if that corporate website has a long list of products with corresponding PI and CMI, then I would be mindful that that could look a bit like it's potentially not as direct, and it would, if it requires the HCP to try and navigate where the product information is relevant to theirs, then that's probably not as accessible as linking directly to the PI. There was another question that was asked previous to the code information session. So when can a QR code or a link to the PI actually replace the MPI? Which has kind of been answered, but it's a nice, it's another opportunity to synthesize what I've been talking about. So omitting the MPI and including a URL or a QR code directly to the PI is possible. We know that, but only when the promotional item satisfies overarching principle 3, where it's balanced and contains sufficient safety and risk information that would render the MPI unnecessary. So the bottom line is that we don't want to rely on readers to access the link, whatever link that is, wherever it takes you, to provide that balance and context. Which kind of leads me quite well into talking about balance. So I might throw the ball to you. This is an ethical crunch. It's something that I'd like you to have a look at. This is effectively the same ad that we have been throwing around. The difference is in this one, well, it's still fake news. It's still fictitious. Examples that doesn't exist, and definitely do not drink it when you're pregnant. However, it's an ad, and for this example, we are going to assume that the claims are adequately qualified, they're accurate, current, and scientifically valid. So the difference between this ad and the ones you've seen previously is that it's got 3 claims there. You can see them in pink, and it's got an image. So I just wanted you to have a quick look at that, and we'll launch a poll and see what you think. The question being is, do you think this piece is consistent with the code? The answer is no, because even though the piece has adequate prescribing information, the benefits of the product are not balanced by any risks. And I would concur. I would agree that this is ultimately seen as unbalanced material. So just going through So congratulations to 86% of you that chose that answer. Excellent. So just going through that example, you can see that it does include the mandatory information that we talked about. And it also includes multiple claims. Has a reference to substantiate claims, and we're going to assume that they are qualified adequately, but where is the risk and safety information to balance those multiple claims? So now that we're talking about balance, what do we mean by balance? So balanced is actually, well, that's a grab from the code glossary. Balanced refers to information presented in full and without bias. In this context, it's best thought of as providing equal importance to the benefits and the risks of a product, and recognizing that product and safety information are just as relevant as any claim. So does this mean that everything needs to be exactly equal? No, there is no expectation that an equal amount of space needs to be dedicated to each. So it's not a physical evaluation so much into terms of the promotional material. However, we do encourage you to consider the proportion of space available for the promotional aspects versus the safety and risk aspects. So is it 50-50? Is it 75-25? Is it 90-10? No hard and fast rule, no hard and fast guidance, but I think that should be in your thought process as to when you're developing and approving material to help you decide if your material is balanced. Also consider the magnitude, the number, and the type of claims. They will alter what kind of balancing considerations you need to make. Clear as crystal. Let's explore what I mean by that. So when we're looking at the benefits of a product, or the claims, in this case, we're looking at the magnitude of the claims, the number of the claims, and the type of claims. These are things to think about. Magnitude of the claims, we refer to that being the power or the strength of that claim. So significant standalone headline claims will need significant balance, whilst weaker claims will need less balance. So an example of potentially a strong claim of great magnitude would be, again, fictitious, made up, a new chewable emphysema treatment proven to significantly increase survival rates by 95%. That's a pretty blockbuster headline, significant claim with magnitude. As opposed to, still a promotional claim, a chewable emphysema treatment provides consistent protection with a fixed daily dose. Okay, so that's the examples to demonstrate that claims differ in magnitude. Also think about the number of claims that you have in the piece. The more claims, the more balancing is required. No claims, there are no benefits to balance. Multiple claims equals multiple benefits equals multiple risk information. So obviously demonstrated by that little picture that if it's 1 versus 4, it's going to be fairly uneven. Again, context is key, but think about the number of claims and the number of risk information. And the type of claims. So claims not only differ in magnitude, but they also differ in type. So some claims will be therapeutic, some claims are non-therapeutic, some will be direct quotes from the PI, some may use comparisons with other products, and some will be efficacy-based. An example of a non-therapeutic claim is that the only chewable emphysema treatment is now available or more affordable for patients, or more patients are prescribed Zamplestat than any other emphysema treatment. So those are non-efficacy based claims. Again, they will help dictate what kind of balancing information you may need to put in there. And in terms of the risks, what should we consider? We should consider the relevance of that risk and safety information to the claim. So, for example, if a claim is about the prevention of worsening renal disease, then include information about contraindications in patients with severe renal impairment. and put that in the body of the piece. So some products will have indications for 2 different disease areas. Obviously, you wouldn't put risk and safety information related to one disease area in a promotional piece targeting the other disease area. So make sure that it's relevant to the claim and relevant to the intention of the piece. The risks and benefits, position and prominence are really important. So position and prominence of the safety information should be considered relevant to the claim being made. That example just gives you, I mean, it's pretty hard to pull out of a whole lot of text what are the risks and benefits, the risks and safety information if it's not positioned well and made prominent. And the age of the product is something to think about as well. So a healthcare professional will not be as familiar with new Australian products, and therefore there are higher expectations to provide more information on prescribing to support their appropriate use. So a new chewable emphysema treatment now available is likely to have more information about risks and benefits, especially risks, because a healthcare professional won't be as familiar with that product as one that's been around for 20 years. So this is your turn again. What do we mean by in the body of the piece? So at the last poll, we determined that a piece might have all the necessary mandatories and links to prescribing information, but it can still be unbalanced. And that is that the piece highlights the benefits whilst downplaying the risks. It also demonstrated to us that we cannot rely on links and QR codes to provide that balance. So here you can see 2 more examples where information has been added to these promotional pieces to try and balance those claims. Introducing safety and risk information. The one on the left includes the minimum PI in full, embedded inside the material, being a print piece, and the one on the right uses added safety and risk information relevant to the claim, and then links to a digital minimum PI via QR code. So my question to you is, when taken as a whole, are we accurately representing the risks and benefits of this product? And again, I'm assuming that claims used in this material are accurate, current and scientifically valid, and are qualified appropriately just for this example. Through those options and explore them for a bit. So the first option that 22% of you thought yes, because it is balanced or accurately represents the risks and benefits of the product. Yes, because the space utilised by the claims is balanced more or less by the space utilised for the risk and prescribing information. So interesting about the space. So yes, we did mention it as a consideration, and it's definitely something to consider, but I would suggest that it's probably not going to be the main reason why a piece will be balanced. It won't be the dictating factor. There is nothing in the code that physically ensures that space is equal, given to equal. And I would also suggest in this case, if you're looking at the dark blue block that has all the writing, that's the kind of space that you're considering. But potentially one could, what about the picture of the lady drinking the Zample-Stap? That's, I would suggest that that's still space in the ad, and that image is also, in a way, promotional. It's definitely not showing the risks of the product. So if you were to lump that space into a benefit or a risk, I would suggest that that image is trying to encourage the use of that product. So actually, if you were to include the imagery, I would suggest that that there isn't actually equal physical space given to the benefits and the risks. So just something to think about. The second option I gave you was no, because including 3 prominent claims needs to be equally balanced by 3 pieces of prominent risk safety information. And in these examples, they are too minimized. So comment on that one. Again, I would, it's a really good thought process. I think one needs to think about whether, how to balance those three prominent claims. I would suggest that the risk and safety information that has been introduced in a piece like this is probably too minimized. But this is my opinion. But there's nothing to actually mandate or require you to do an equal 3 claims equals three risk safety informations. It's not so much 3 to 3, it's just how you believe it should be appropriately balanced. So again, I think there is room for improvement for the way that risk information has been minimized in its presentation. But I'd suggest that maybe yeah, anyway, they're my thoughts on that one. The third option was not sure. They are far better than the previous example we polled on, but I'm sitting on the fence. I would agree that they are far better than the previous example. So now you see where we're heading in terms of achieving balance in a piece, but not quite sure. And the third was they could be okay as the base minimum, but they could also be improved. And I would also agree with that they probably are okay as a base minimum, but there is room for improvement. And these are my thoughts. Again, this is a fictitious scenario, so we can't really categorize whether it's compliant or not compliant. It all depends on sample stat, the prominence of the claims, and what information you have to wrestle with. So in this case, I'm going to park this example here without giving you a categorical answer, because they weren't designed to be right or wrong. They were designed to demonstrate how important it is to achieve balance in a body of a piece and not rely on linked information to provide that balance. And it's also a really good reminder that how you achieve balance is your decision to make. It will be subjective, as people may come to different conclusions, as demonstrated from this poll. So when making a decision, think about how you would rationalise that decision, why you've made that decision, what principles you have considered from the code, and how you would defend that decision if you are asked to demonstrate how that material is adequately balanced. Great. So I did mention guidance. I've mentioned the QR guidance. Now we've just last month we published guidance on balance in product-related materials. So this is a 2-pager. It's really nice and succinct, and it's on our code resource toolkit. And largely, a lot of the content I'm talking about today is derived from that guidance. So I would encourage you to go and have a look. The second page is quite a useful structure or format. It's kind of designed to support decision making and help you think about how to balance materials. So it categorizes the message in the piece, leads you to the kind of expectations to think about in terms of balancing and why that exists. So if I was to grab the previous example that we used, that one that we just showed you, that you thought about, let's see if we can squeeze it through the decision-making framework or the guidance that that's on your screen. So in this case, we know that we've got 3 claims there in the pink. So we have more than one claim. In fact, I would suggest that we have multiple claims. So we are looking at a complex or moderate piece if you were to categorize the messaging in the piece. Do you have substantial piece in the material, or do you have moderate space? Look, it could go either way. Either way, if it's complex or moderate, it still has the same expectations, that we have multiple claims. And so let's look at what those expectations would be. That piece includes relevant safety information specific to the claim being made. Also, you would need to display the minimum PI in full or employ QR codes and hyperlinks in lieu of the minimum PI, which in this case, they've chosen to use the QR code to provide that link. And if there is not enough space in the material to provide ample balance, then reconsider the messaging and the claims in this piece. So if we landed on, if you were of the view that it could be improved, that the claims were so prominent, not only one, but three, that the risk information was minimised, and how you would change it. Potentially you could think, well, do we need the three claims up there? Having three claims makes it really hard to balance appropriately. Maybe we need to remove three claims and just go with one. If you were to remove two of those claims and go with one claim, then I would suggest that potentially that piece would be more balanced than it is struggling to do with three claims up there. So revisit the messaging in your piece and revisit the real estate. So maybe if you want the three claims in there, is this small digital ad appropriate to be the format? Or do you really need to save those three claims for a larger piece where you can provide more real estate to balance those three claims? So always think about going back to the drawing board if you cannot achieve balance in your piece. So that's an example of how to use that guidance to help step you through some of those thought processes. And it might be useful also if you are having conversations within your companies to sales and marketing people who are often in the design phase. And when you're towards the end of that process, some questions to ask yourself. These are just kind of quick checklist questions. So is the safety and risk information consistent with the medical condition? Or they should be related, really. They should be meaningful. Is the safety information relevant to the claim? If viewed in isolation, would the claim be misleading? Does the piece emphasize the benefits while downplaying the risks? And is it misleading by omission or imbalance? So the word misleading is there twice, and that's quite an interesting aspect to think about. The general thought is that an imbalanced piece that emphasizes the benefits and down to the detriment of the risks is not going to support the adequate use, appropriate use of that medicine. And therefore, it is likely to mislead the audience to thinking that that product has more benefits and less risks. And therefore, by misleading the audience, you also have an increased chance that you'll come afoul of the code, and that the prescriber, that you're influencing prescribing decisions that are not aligned with quality use of medicines. So a piece can be misleading also by omission. So if a medicine had a black box warning, for example, absolutely you must know this before prescribing, and that piece did not make that black box warning prominent in promotional material and was omitted, then I think it would be safe to assume that that piece was misleading by omission and therefore imbalanced. So just think about how imbalance can lead to misleading prescribers. And how important is balance? I mean, how important is it really, especially when it's so subjective? So our answer to that is it's pretty important. We are the custodians of our medicines. We conduct ourselves ethically, and we need to communicate appropriately about our medicines to those who rely on our medicines. 6 out of the 9 complaints that have been adjudicated under Code Edition 19 have included a breach or an alleged breach on overarching principles 3 and 7. So obviously it is a prominent and core component of some disagreements between companies about promotional material. And they are some screen grabs from our published complaints from the Code Committee. It's also worth noting, so this is the last one about the breach and the maximum fine. That's come straight from the code. So the Code Committee used that code bit to decide on whether a breach or an alleged breach is moderate, minor, or severe. And if a promotional piece may have an effect on how the medical profession will prescribe the product. It's likely to be categorised as a moderate breach with a maximum fine of $150,000. So an imbalanced piece that overemphasises the benefits to the detriment of the risks may have an effect on how a prescriber will prescribe that product. So that's what's at play. I suppose I'd also like just to bring to your attention that the Code Committee have also said in their minutes of their decisions that if a piece is imbalanced and therefore misleads a prescriber, it is it is therefore unlikely that that piece would also be consistent with overarching principle 1 about the quality use of medicines. So a misleading promotional piece simply cannot be consistent with supporting the quality use of medicines. So there is a downstream effect on the implications of an imbalanced piece. So I didn't want to end this with doomsday, but I just wanted to raise this as an important issue that companies really need to consider and understand the implications of balance. We're almost there. So one last example on the home stretch now. I thought I'd pop this one to your attention. We're not polling you on this one. I just wanted you to take a minute and have a look at this rotating digital banner. I mean, I might just walk you through some things to think about. So as you're just looking at it, maybe think about everything that we've talked about today. Mandatory information, balance. This is a different format. I suppose it's a rotating digital banner ad. It's clearly fictitious. Sample stat doesn't exist, and it definitely doesn't lower cholesterol. And for the purposes of this example, we're going to assume that the claim is adequately qualified, accurate, current, and scientifically valid. So some things to think about with this piece. We did talk about, so firstly, the timing of the slides. So when we created this fictitious ad, you'll see that it rests your eyes for 3 seconds on that slide, on this slide, and then it gives you a little bit longer, 5 seconds on this final slide, simply to allow the viewer to interpret, understand, and read the relevant information which is on that final slide. So glossing over it too quickly is not going to demonstrate clearly accessible product information. Secondly, I would suggest that this is an ad that has one significant therapeutic claim, that being to minimise risk of stroke, on the second slide with the Latin. So if we were to quickly race you through back to our wonderful guidance here and the messaging on the piece, it's starting to look and feel like a simple piece, the purple, the third one down. So it has, for one claim, it also has minimum space in the material, for example, a digital banner or a single stand panel. So I'd suggest that simple is probably the better way to categorize this ad. And therefore there are lower expectations in terms of balancing. So we have thrown it back to the company to decide on what risk information is adequate to balance any claims made. And in addition, we confirm that QR codes and hyperlinks are appropriate. So ultimately, the risks associated with the product that are relevant should be embedded inside the material and visible in the close proximity to the claim of benefit. That's the rationale. So let's speed through and find that digital banner ad again. Bear with me, thank you. In this case, you have the significant claim there, and you have the risk and safety information placed underneath it. And in this case, the risk and safety information is a boxed warning. So you will all know about boxed warnings. It is imposed on the product by the TGA. And as per the TGA website, for prescription medicines that have a boxed warning included in their PI, all promotional material must include the boxed warning or a prominent statement drawing attention to that boxed warning. So in this case, the boxed warning has been prized out and placed near the claim as the balancing material that company has decided that is needed to be put in conjunction with the claim being made, which is a pretty good way to do it. And all the mandatories are on that third slide. So I suppose here what we're looking at is, I just wanted to also draw your attention to the body of the piece. So in this case, we don't call each slide a piece, we call the whole thing a piece. So including risk information is included in the body of the piece in this case, but it doesn't have to be, the mandatories don't have to be on every single slide. The piece, the 3 slides rotating is seen as one whole. And I think that's really it for today. I have time for questions and answers, and then I might end with some updates on the code review, if you could stay on the call, on the line for that one. But a quick note on where to get some help. So as you know, code help desk at medicinesaustralia.com.au. Now you know who's on the other side. That's Lucy and myself. Happy to get back to you. Notes from the help desk is regular articles that are actually a member benefit, so they only go to members, but they do walk through some of the ethical and dilemma kind of grey areas that we experience and try and figure out how to apply the code to different contexts. So they exist on our member portal for members. We've also got the code resource toolkit. Hopefully you've familiarised yourself with that, and the recording of this webinar will be available on that code resource toolkit in a few weeks. And we've got the fabulous continuing education program that's conducted through the University of Tasmania. So today, you know, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professional educator, so I'm just giving you a free foray into some specific subjects about the code. But the University of Tasmania have a number of programs. Program 1 is on the code of conduct, and it has some great case studies, interactive scenarios, videos, quizzes, and you're assessed as well. It's an 18 to 20 hours self-paced learning piece. So encourage you to think about doing that if you haven't already. But a quick note on where to get some help. So as you know, code help desk at medicinesaustralia.com.au. Now you know who's on the other side. That's Lucy and myself. Happy to get back to you. Notes from the help desk is regular articles that are actually a member benefit, so they only go to members, but they do walk through some of the ethical and dilemma kind of grey areas that we experience and try and figure out how to apply the code to different contexts. So they exist on our member portal for members. We've also got the code resource toolkit. Hopefully you've familiarised yourself with that, and the recording of this webinar will be available on that code resource toolkit in a few weeks. And we've got the fabulous continuing education program that's conducted through the University of Tasmania. So today, you know, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professional educator, so I'm just giving you a free foray into some specific subjects about the code. But the University of Tasmania have a number of programs. Program 1 is on the code of conduct, and it has some great case studies, interactive scenarios, videos, quizzes, and you're assessed as well. It's an 18 to 20 hours self-paced learning piece. So encourage you to think about doing that if you haven't already. And thanks again, and have a beautiful, beautiful Thursday, and see you around.